Yeah, do we know that to start with talking about electron transport chain and the oxidative phosphorylation, we have to start with the molecule. That's the glucose oxidation. That's the molecule that starts the whole process. We know that the glucose is a 6-carbon molecule. You know, certainly here has 3 different forms to show the molecule. It's a ball stick structure, or we call this alpha D glucopyranose. That's the in the Howard's projection, and or the Fisher projection of the glucose. Certainly, they are essentially the same thing, just in different forms. We know that glycolysis is a 10-step reaction, and it happens in the cytoplasm. And certainly, from one glucose molecule, when it goes through these 10 steps, it ends up with this molecule so-called pyruvate. And certainly it's a 3-carbon molecule. So from a one glucose molecule, you end up with 2 pyruvate molecules. So that's important to remember. Okay, 10-step reaction. With one glucose molecule, you have 2 pyruvate molecules produced. So here is a summary of what happened in the glycolysis step. And from a 6-carbon molecule of glucose, you end up with a 3-carbon molecule of pyruvate. So one glucose, you produce 2 pyruvate, and it happened in the cytoplasm. And in the first half process of glycolysis, is an energy requiring step. It uses 2 ATPs. And in the second half of the glycolysis step, it produces 4 ATPs and 2 NADH. Certainly, the overall result is 2 ATP produced and 2 NADH, right? Because you produce 4 ATP in the second half, but they use 2 ATP in the beginning. So 4 minus 2, you end up with 2 net production of ATP in the glycolysis step. And following glycolysis, and for the Krebs cycle, and the following electron transport and the oxidative phosphorylation, that happened in the mitochondria. That's one of the the organelle inside the cells. So the mitochondria is a double membrane organelle, and here it shows the the outer membrane. You have the inner membrane. Then inside we call it the matrix. That's the matrix of the mitochondria. And in between the outer membrane and the inner membrane, that's the intermembrane space. That's the reason we emphasize it, because later we will talk about it. How important it is, because that's where proton will accumulate, and when it flows through this inner membrane, you have a huge amount of ATP produced. So that's the important kind of thing. So let's say the structure we need to remember. Okay, in between the outer membrane and the inner membrane, we have this intermembrane space where a high concentration of proton is accumulated. So there will be a low pH area. And sometimes you have a test question that asks about if you test the pH in different regions of mitochondria, what happens, right? And you should remember, right, that in this intermembrane space, proton concentration is high, and you have a low pH. So in the matrix, certainly the pH is high because you have a lower concentration of proton. And here is kind of just a flow chart of the pyruvate oxidation and the TCA cycle. So the pyruvate acid and lose 1 carbon in the first step, and NAD is reduced into NADH. So that's first NADH produced in this step. And when pyruvate acid lose one carbon, you have acetyl-CoA produced. And acetyl-CoA will combine with oxaloacetic acid. That's the 4-carbon molecule. You'll form a 6-carbon molecule. That's the citric acid. So citric acid is the first molecule produced in the this Krebs cycle or the TCA cycle. So that's why this process is sometimes also called the citric acid cycle, because that's the first molecule produced. And through this Krebs cycle, you have many molecules of NADH produced, and also you have ATP produced. So we'll next slide will have a summarize how many NADH, how many ATP, and how many FADH2 produced. So let me show you the next slide. So through the oxidation of pyruvate, and also go through this citric acid cycle, as I said earlier, right? It's also called TCA cycle or Krebs cycle. It happens in mitochondria, and so each pyruvate molecule will produce 4 NADH molecules, 1 FADH2 and 1 ATP. As we know that 1 glucose will produce 2 pyruvates, right? So that's, if we talk about how many molecules of ATP, FADH2, and NADH produced, so per glucose molecule, you'll have 8 NADH produced, 2 FADH2 produced, and 2 ATP produced. So this is just a simple diagram to show you the electron transport chain. The first thing we want to you want to remember is there are 4 complexes in the chain. So you have complex number 1, complex number 2, complex number 3, and complex number 4. And there's also cytochrome C involved in the electron transport process. So when NADH is being oxidized, and the high power electron will help to pump proton through the inner membrane into the intermembrane space. So electron being passed through the different components of the electron transport chain complex, and eventually oxygen will receive the electron, and the water is produced. So FADH2 enter into the chain first through the complex number 2. So FADH2 contributes less proton accumulation in the intermembrane space than NADH. So NADH contributes more proton accumulation than FADH2. And so this is the step of proton being pumped from the mitochondria into the intermembrane space. Okay, here is a kind of an overall sketch of the first few steps process we talk about, like the citric acid cycle, the electron transport, and the next step. What happened is the highly accumulated proton will flow down this ATP synthesis to drive the synthesis from ADP into ATP. This flow down of a proton through this gradient, this process is called osmochemolysis. So through this is the major step for ATP production. So we'll remember, okay, this ATP production mainly through this proton flow down this gradient through a process called chemiosmosis. So through this electron transport chain and oxidative phosphorylation, normally you have a roughly between 32 and 34 molecules of ATP formed. That's because there's a difference of how NADH enter into the mitochondria, and also whether 2 or 3 ATP formed for NADH. So there's a difference. That's why it could be between 32 and 34 ATP formed. And so if we consider the glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, and right, because you have a total of 4 ATP formed in those processes. That's the glycolysis and Krebs cycle. So when you end up with the electron transport chain and oxidative phosphorylation, that'll be like between 36 and to 38 ATP formed per ATP molecule. Okay. And so the certainly when oxygen is available, right, you will go through this TCA cycle or the C cycle for pyruvate. But when oxygen is lacking, so pyruvate will go through this fermentation step to form lactate. Like when you run fast or exercise heavily, right? Sometimes you feel sore in your muscles. That's because the you have a fermentation process going on in your muscle cells. So NADH being oxidized and will drive this fermentation process. And so certainly protein, when protein metabolized, right, to produce to provide energy, it's like a protein will be hydrolyzed into different amino acids, right? That's amino acids, that's the building block for proteins. So different amino acids will enter into this energy processing producing step at various steps, and eventually, right, all the amino acids will contribute to the energy production. And that happens the same with like lipids. Lipids, when lipids being metabolized, they also contribute to the production of ATP. And so the fatty acid will enter into the process, at various steps of the cyclic cycle. So eventually, it will contribute to the production of ATP. Yeah, this kind of just an extra slide to show you the how ethanol is produced when the people use yeast or bacteria to make alcohol, right? To make wine or beer, right? That you also start with the pyruvic acid and go through this alcohol fermentation step. You have ethanol produced. That's what's the main component in beer or wine. Okay, so then that's in the presentation. Thank you.